Welcome to Google Ads Unleashed, the podcast that helps you harness the power of Google Ads. And now your host, Jeremy Young.
Hello and welcome, guys, to another episode of Google Ads Unleashed. Today is another interview, and I'm very much looking forward to this, really, because I always like to think that I kind of know one or two things about Google Ads, and it doesn't happen too often to meet your match. So, and to be outgunned by a million times as well. So today I have Vincent on. Vincent is a Google Ads coach. And he also has run his own agency and is running his own agency. So, yeah, I think best is to just give you the word and for you to introduce yourself, mate.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm very humbled by your approach. Just a little background on me. So far in this game, I started in 2011. And back then, obviously, Google Ads there was no smart bidding. There were no algorithms. It was just, bidding on keywords, manual CPC. That was the game.
I remember the days, yeah.
So it all started 13 years ago. I finished I finished a bachelor. My bachelor was communication, actually, just a super broad thing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what do I want to do next? Because suddenly, after that wonderful time of student life, you get thrown into now you need to become a little bit more serious. And I actually got taken internally at a German agency. Well, you have a German background. You know how German.
I do indeed, yeah. I actually get messages now and again when people wonder if I'm South African or something like that.
Yeah, I thought at first too. Yeah, you have this beautiful mix of the accents. But if you know anything about German agencies, and especially back then, they were really, the German way was pretty much refined and drilled down to its core. So I got a really good internal education there. And after 4.5 years or so, I've worked with these big brands from day one, like Yves Rocher, the Bon Prix. They have $100K a month. So from
Bon Prix.
Bon Prix, yeah.
Yeah, that's the catalog people, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So that was those massive brands were there, and they've also that agency back then was a top 3 of Europe. So I had a very large collection of big ass clients I could work on, but at the same time, starting from day one on these accounts felt a little bit overwhelming. I was like, oh my god, these big budgets,
Yeah.
But it was fun, and after 4.5 years, I decided basically okay, it's time for the next step. So I went to an affiliate party in Amsterdam. Something completely different, but they asked hey, we need somebody to build out the Google Ads strategy inside of our networks. Mm-hmm. And I tried that for 3 months, but it wasn't the right fit for me. It didn't felt right. So they were doing neutral offers and all that, so it just didn't click with me. So I decided you know what? And back then, my currently former business partner, he was already doing freelance stuff. So I basically jumped on the bandwagon and I made the switch from that point forward. I'm going to go fully freelancing. And back then I still recall it. I didn't have the idea that I would be an agency owner or run my own business. That never occurred to me. It just kind of organically developed. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the same with me, really.
It's amazing, right?
That was never the plan. It just sort of happened.
Yeah, that's how beautiful it is, and I think also for you, Jeremy, when you're looking back, you're I never would have done anything else like this. Yeah. This was the path. I would never go back to anything else. I would rather work 60 hours for myself than 40 for somebody else, right? That's just why you go. So that was a really transformative year. That was actually 2015. That's where we started our own agency, and up to. In the last 13 years, did more than 2,500 ad accounts. So I've seen more than 2,500 ad accounts, audited them all. I spent roughly about 85 million in ad spend, and I trained a couple of hundred people on Google Ads. It's been mostly e-commerce, but also we did some lead gen, and but specializing and niching down is pretty much key if you really want to get everything out of Google Ads, as you know. So that's pretty much a little bit of the development. And I had an own agency that I exited at the end of 2022. Back then, it was for me time to move on to something else. And right now, I'm mostly doing. I'm in e-commerce accelerators / incubators. I'm doing coaching roles there. I'm doing consulting. And for some of the right fits, I have a few done for you slots available, because I find it always very much important that you gotta keep staying in the weeds. You cannot say, okay, I have 10 years of experience, now I'm just doing consult. No, you gotta keep on pace with all the changes, because otherwise your advice is just outdated.
Yeah,
right?
It's funny you should say that, really, because last night I personally built out an ad account for one of the latest onboardings we've had now in March. And I did it myself, and I kind of really enjoyed it. It was really good because I just like doing it, if that makes sense. And you can't be a leader if you don't know how to. If you've forgotten how the interface looks, right? That was one of my greatest frustrations as well when I worked at an agency a couple of years ago. The dude who owned it, nice guy, don't get me wrong, really respected him, but he just didn't know anything about the matter. And you can't be a leader if you don't know, if you're not on the ground, if you don't have an ear on the ground, so to speak.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a key point there as well. Like you like you said, you enjoyed it, right? You got energy from it, and that's also something that I experienced while building the agency out. You start something because you're kind of like, you develop yourself as an expert. You get more experience. You love what you do. And when you build an agency out, you suddenly come across all these different assets and facets of a business building, that not everything is what you like. You still do it because it's part of the business, but ultimately you want to keep like track. For me, that was important. Like, what drains me and what fuels me with energy? Because if I'm only doing those draining tasks, building an agency is not fun anymore. And I think that's a fallacy that I see a lot in the market right now. A lot of people are just doing it because, hey, this is working and I have a skill, but ultimately it's not for everybody. Like, sometimes it's just good staying here. For some people it's there, it's all fine, but you got to find what energizes you.
Yeah, 100%. So naturally, you've got a lot of drive. You've exited the agency, you said. You start to go more into sort of a higher level consultancy type of stuff. I see a lot on your, so you mentioned it yourself, over 2,500 ad accounts you've seen. That's a lot. I'd like to think I've seen probably, I wouldn't even know how many, probably a good few hundred, easily up to 1,000 myself. The $2,500 is amazing. Yeah. Tell me a little bit, what are sort of the top, because most people listen, right? Some of them are, of course, e-commerce business owners or have their own business. Some of them are people who literally are in PPC and just want to expand their horizon. Mm-hmm. Some of them are completely new to digital marketing, right? So quite a varied audience. What are sort of the top things that you've seen over time, and which you guess I take into your teaching as well, if that makes sense, into your consultancy? What are sort of the top things people overlook, do wrong, etc.?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of background about the 2.5K, because for a lot of people it's like, how did you do 2.5K of accounts? Funny enough, we started back then, as we just started out freelancing, we went to a platform that everybody likely knows called Fiverr, and we started offering Google Ads audits for $5. So, right, that's where it all started. We just did it for $5. It was not profitable at all, but we build up reviews, and then the algorithm starts taking you away. So that was our start. And obviously from those audits came clients and et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we quickly build up a momentum. And that's also how because we're Dutch based, right? I'm
very
from Amsterdam,
by the way. But a very good idea. It's almost like loss leader, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's how we organically grew into the American market, because I'm just Dutch. I was thinking like, we work with Dutch brand or European brands, but suddenly you're working with American brands. And that market is completely different, much larger, higher volumes. So some things were just working differently in the European market than there. And that's all the stuff. But to come to your question, like, what are the typical flaws? I think I'm always hammering down on the fundamentals, because after all of these accounts that I've watched and seen, the number one thing is always the fundamentals. And with fundamentals, I mean tracking, right? I can tell you that it's commonly known that if you have an account that doesn't spend that much, this is typically where you see duplicate conversion tracking of some sort. But I've seen 8-9-figure businesses sometimes even having a duplicate conversion tracking running, where you're like, dude, at this level, you can't do that, right? So tracking is always one. Make sure that that's right. Then obviously we had the build it when you have search campaigns, breaking them out into thematic intent-based ad groups, right? That was one of the things. They would just throw in all the keywords in one ad group, just run shopping/PMax, where they throw all the products. They have like 1,000 SKUs and just throw it into one campaign in one ad group. These type of things, like all the fundamental things. Plus, a lot of people think that, hey, what I do in the ad interface, if I just tweak my little bid strategy here, I get a better outcome on my shopping. But ultimately, the product feed is 70% of the success of your PMax and shopping. And that's a lot of time that's neglected. There can be so much done on that end just to increase.
It's crazy how often we go into ad accounts when we get like asked to audit something, and the first titles were never touched or the feed was never touched, and you're like, dude, how are you meant to? If the feed, for instance, at the moment, I'm working with so that's the account I built up yesterday. They sell coffee, right? And it's a very specific kind of coffee. And nowhere in the title it mentioned their USP, which is the core thing that people would search for in order to find this product. Of course, Google Ads never works, right? Because or as well as it should be, because literally the thing people look for to find your product is not there. How is Google meant to know?
Yeah. Exactly. And that is exactly it. And to your point, what you're saying, it reminded me this morning on the accelerator, I had a person who I checked their shopping feed, and they are selling kind of like frozen meal foods.
Yeah.
But in their shopping titles, they just said, a 4-person lasagna. But that was it. There was nothing else. Yeah. So I was like, okay, you can easily expand auctions by just putting in there, like it's some frozen meals or meal delivery, whatever that is. Yeah. But this is super basic. Yeah. So there's so much to be done.
I think the biggest one, just another example, because I think this is something that's so obvious, but to many people who listen, this is like, I've never thought about it this way, like such an obvious thing. You sometimes don't see the forest for the trees. Many months ago, I onboarded a client. Unfortunately, they've left not through our doing. There were external issues, funding issues, and so on. But they were they did furniture, right? And their thing was all of the product titles were like IKEA, like something like Desk Larry or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
All the product titles. You're like, that's never going to work. And the funny thing is, again, the desk, all of the furniture was metal. So it was a real specific thing someone would look for, a metal nightstand black or something like that, where some of the things someone would look for to obviously find the product. Yeah. Nothing in the title, nothing in all of the all of the product parameters either. So no color, nothing, no material. Oh, wow. It's crazy. So basics like that, and this business was doing $1.5 million a month or something, and you're like, how?
Yeah, that's insane, no?
Yeah.
And then when you have a very high searchable business, because there's businesses that are very good on meta, but people don't know how to search for the product, so there's not really an intent. But for these companies that can boom on search, like you said, just I think it relies also to they don't know what they don't know. And that's why you come in or I come in and we're like, hey, have you thought about this? And they're like, oh, wow. Because they just do the straight content API import from Shopify into the Merchant Center, and they think, let's go. Yeah. And it's just more to the eye, and more to meets the eye, basically there.
Are there any further points that you maybe want to share?
Yeah, so what I've seen, because I've worked with very large accounts and very small accounts, and I think everybody knows there's no cookie cutter strategy. What I typically do, what I would recommend, and what most people don't do, they just say, okay, let me set up a search campaign, let me set up a shopping campaign, let me set up a PMax. There's not really a strategy. What you ultimately want to do is you want to embody the objective. What's the objective? How can we break that down? The most auctions are on shopping. Right? That's simply where the most auctions are available. So shopping is kind of like a no-brainer for anything in e-commerce. Then we have obviously the search equivalent. One of the others, brand contamination, as you probably are familiar with, where agencies that run it that either do not fully understand or understand it good enough, but the client doesn't, where they leave the brand traffic spread across non-brand campaigns to look like non-brand is actually performing better than it is. And that's one of those things where we really want to funnel the right traffic to the right places, just to see how much do you actually how much is Google of an acquisition channel versus a bottom of funnel channel for Facebook or whatever. And that's one of the biggest struggles that most companies have there.
Yeah. So what would you say, sort of, especially having looked with something that we face a lot with not only our clients, right, but something that many people come to us is sort of trying to break through a barrier, because there are certain natural barriers that Google just has, right? Like as in search volume, there's only so many people looking for your stuff, right? And many accounts sort of hit some form of limit because they're just natural parameters, such as the margin of your product or the search volume or your conversion rate on the site. What are sort of would be your core strategies for someone or a business to overcome barriers like that, like to get to the next level with using Google Ads?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think for any Google Ads agency or agency owner or Google Ads media buyer, it is quite key to not only understand Google, but also understand Meta and TikTok and whatnot. So just understand, not because Google, back in the days, it was very technical and you could just be the PPC nerd, but you could get away with not having any marketing knowledge whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, it becomes much more creative, and you need to understand marketing fundamentals. Like, in what stage of awareness are these people? How can my messaging align better with these people? The higher I can acquire them at the top of funnel, the least of my competition is there, the least of them they will see, and therefore, I can stay top of mind. So these things, if you just look at Google Ads and you just look at, okay, I'm good at shopping, it's not typically the skills that you might have. So that's what I would always recommend. Like, your power of how much you can do with Google Ads kind of like stops with your knowledge. So I had one student once, and I told her basically, like, if you want to become better at Google Ads, stop learning more about Google Ads and start learning marketing and offers and fundamentals from marketing instead, because you will start to understand where your power, what you can do with the knobs and the bits and the pieces in Google Ads kind of like stops. And you could look at, okay, but how is your offer doing? What is the landing page? How does this align with conversion rate optimization principles? And I understand, you don't want to be an expert in any field, but it only will take you a few hours to understand the basics in those fields. And it will just be added value to you as a freelancer/agency owner to have that added value in calls, because client education is also pretty much key for retention. So that will help you across the board. So to your question, how can we scale people with Google only? Well, it is kind of like contrarian take, but I would say understanding the whole playing field, like omni-channel, because Google is mostly like an search, shopping, PMax, is typically in demand capturing. And then we have obviously demand generation. Facebook is typically better at that than Google is, because if we just use demand gen campaigns in Google or YouTube, it's just much harder to crack. There is obviously an opportunity for lead gen. YouTube is perfect, but for ecom, YouTube can be difficult. Right now with YouTube Shorts, you have cheap clicks, but still the conversion equivalent is kind of like, it's a hit or miss. And it's a lot of
convert well at all. We've tried it quite a few times now.
Yeah. And one of these flaws there is as well, people send traffic directly to product pages, test also, advertorials and warm-up pages, but still it likely does not perform as well initially as Facebook. But my experience is that Facebook is just super inconsistent. And you're doing this monkey business of like setting campaigns up every other day. I've done also 6 years of Facebook ads. So that's where, I could compare the two, and most people coming from a Facebook perspective, how that changes when they do Google ads. And in Google, once you have your YouTube really figured out, it's really stable and you don't have that much ad fatigue as you would have in other channels. So that's kind of like it. So I think scaling Google ads also involves a lot of like, okay, how can we grow the demand generation of Google, and can we acquire them equally or cheaper than, for example, Meta? If not, it might be in your interest to say, okay, let's boost Meta. What is the first touch point that people come through? Because if it's just bottom of funnel traffic, you might want to look like, okay, people either do holdout tests or third-party tracking tools where you can see what is the first touch point. And that becomes with the deprecating of third-party tracking cookies this year, attribution is going to shit. Like we all know this, it's already difficult, but it's definitely going to get harder. So understanding what the influence is for first click versus the whole customer journey becomes much more important. So that's another one.
That's kind of a nice sort of almost segue to sort of the next sort of point that I had, because naturally you've had the timeline now from 2011, where, by the way, I started as well, right? But at the time, at the first couple of years, I didn't take it as seriously. It was like it wasn't my main job at the time. That's kind of what I'm going to. And then we've seen so many updates over the years. Where do you see Google go in the next 5 years? What is sort of your predictions? What skills are going to become more important? Where's media buying going to go? Role of automation and AI? All that stuff. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. I think we're continuing on the road that we have set. PMax was the newest iteration of it, gained popularity. The reason why Google refuses to give us insights is because they say the system works better without your interference. So that's going to continue. We're going to continue, I think in 3 to 5 years, I think in 3 years, but ultimately in 5 years, we have a keywordless future. There will no longer be keywords in Google Ads. I don't believe that, because Google will have so many signals that they understand. Like, you either tell them in a theme what you want, they go out and hunt for you. So that's definitely the road that they're going to be on. Another thing, it's going to become more creative, more strategy, and less, in the weeds button pushing. Where it's already on a decreasing mode, but that's going to be happen even faster. And I think ultimately, you look at a role, like it's going to be more like you're going to be the pilot steering the account, and not the technician in the account tweaking all the little bits and all the little bit strategies. I think that's going to be. It's going to remove itself in regards to. So yeah, it becomes more of like and this comes into play with the former argument where I said like understanding marketing fundamentals. I think that's becoming more important, where you can say, because AI can only imitate, it cannot create yet, so it becomes important. If you know, for example, that for brands it works really well to have to send non-branded traffic, cold traffic to review pages. That's not something that AI would come up like, hey, let me create it. No, that's something that you still have to put in play and let AI send traffic to it. So these type of things, these little like strategies and offerings and positioning of your offer, I think that becomes more important. And the actual traffic aspect becomes very simple, and it will work. And yeah, I don't know what's going to be with the insights. I don't think they're going to give us all the insight. But as long as people get results, that's going to work for them. And everything that Google launches caters to the average advertiser, right? PMax is perfect for the average advertiser that does want some results, but they don't want the stellar results. Stellar results is when you really start scaling aggressively, you spend a lot, and there you can cut down those margins. That's where you and I typically come into play, to really play with those margins. But for the average advertiser, PMax is just like, it's gold.
Yeah. Well, sounds a little bit scary, right? Like, especially to many sort of current advertisers, because, I'm not too scared, to be honest, because do you remember when Smart Shopping came out? We thought it's going to be over, right? Like our job's over, and then it obviously turned out that's now over 6 years ago. Obviously, was the case, right? So. I think it's just going to change. It's just going to be different.
It's absolutely true. I think that happened every few years when they announced something new. At first, it was smart shopping. Then it was we had the smart bidding strategy. We're like, well, if the bid strategy think, oh, what do we have to do? We don't have to do the bids anymore. What are we going to do? But we figured out there was still enough work for us to do. PMax, same thing. PMax is still, if you leave it running, set and forget, you're obviously going to pay much more than you should. But for some people that works. But in one way, the market says 95% of your work will be automated, and on the other side, don't worry, AI won't take over these things. You're still going to be in the schedule. So we'll just see. But you can only go by a hunch feeling right now, and hopefully we'll be proven wrong.
Yeah, hopefully. So let's switch a little bit to with a focus on you. So tell me a little bit about Project Pivot and tell me what you guys do, and maybe what would be interesting is because there will be people listening and thinking, I might need Vincent. How can they get in touch with you? What can they do? Maybe you can even share like a success story, where as long as you're allowed to share, of course. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, so to get in touch with me, I mean, there's my Twitter. You can just search by my name, Vincent Beima. You will find me. Facebook as well, LinkedIn as well. I'm mostly present on Twitter and Facebook, though. So there you find me. Well, Project Pivot, what we basically, it came out of an idea of like, I exited the agency and I was like, okay, I don't know what I want to do next, but I like what I do. So I just take this in between here, see what sticks. Well, obviously, you build up quite a network. So a lot of people came and a bit of consultancy, a bit of training people. So now we have I think we have 3 different offers. We have the typical done for you, but very select few, not a whole lot, because we want to, boutique style agency. We like to get results for our clients. It takes more time, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have our hybrids. In hybrid, it's for the small to medium sized business where I go in, I ask what is the goal. I set up like a very future proof campaign structure. I check if all the settings are right, if the tracking is implemented correctly, and I give them basically the keys to the kingdom. Like, okay, this is how you should run this from now on. You don't need an agency anymore. This is how you can do it. Right. So, and then ultimately, once they grow to a certain point, they start to need an agency again. But at first, I give them basically that format for to do so. And then we have the consulting, where basically people hire me to look over their shoulder into the accounts. Like, this is what's currently happening, and how can you help me to XYZ? So we just meet on a weekly basis. We audit the accounts. We create a roadmap, and then we look like, okay, what changes do we need to make? And from every week, we look back, like, what did the change do? What should we do next? And so I gradually move from the consulting space. And then, maybe a 4th offering is just training people, training teams for Google Ads. Like, how can they increase their level? What knowledge are they missing? Auditing those people and seeing where can I fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and that is maybe a nice segue to sort of revealing that, in fact, we will be working together, because I'm never scared to admit this, even in the podcast where I talk exclusively about Google Ads. I don't know everything, right? Like it's impossible to know everything, which is why you have to talk, you have to inform yourself, you have to invest in yourself. I think Alex Hormozi said it. I saw a tweet of his the other day. The only investment which is recession proof is the investment in yourself, right? Which is what we're doing. So we're going to be actually working together with you from next month onwards.
Yeah, I'm excited about that one.
I'm very excited about that. So, and see what results it's going to bring for our clients. But what sort of final advice would you have to any freelancer, agency owner, maybe like myself, to vet themselves to sort of, get to that next level?
I have a few, actually. I thought about this, and there's a few lessons that for me have been pretty much pivotal in my growth. So the first one, I think a lot of people are obviously distracted by the new thing, the new shiny objects. And I will say, like, focus on the fundamentals first, master them. Just like, the basketball players, the Kobe Bryants, they were up early in the morning just throwing hoops, just to the basics and dribbling. Do that also with your Google Ads, all the campaign structure, tracking, make sure you fundamentals that are all correct. If you do that and you master them, you'll be ahead of 90% of your competitors. So do that first, only the fundamentals. The rest is cherries on the cake. The second one, if you're an agency owner or a freelancer, trust is your number one currency. Right? There's nothing. As a client, they basically invest their trust in you. So whatever you do, trust is key here, and you want to make sure that you in other words, deserve the trust. Well, and that comes into the third point, where client education is imperative. What I've seen working with clients, some clients, they got lucky and they built up a business. But some of these clients simply lack certain education. And if you're not aware what level they're at, and you're reporting from a standpoint of like them expecting what you do, there's like a disconnect. And at some point you see them leaving or whatever happens. So at some point you got to understand, does this client understand how Google functions in the flywheel of omni-channel channels? And, also with new customer acquisition of media efficiency ratios. I have clients that we're talking about return on ad spend. And I'm like, yeah, return on ad spend is cool, but if you only get returning clients, how does that grow your business, right? So you need to have those conversations. Fourthly, if you've anybody that listens that is a freelancer, media buyer, or an agency owner has had experiences with bad clients, right? It's just, everybody had that experience. And I read a few books. I love human nature, human behavior, and psychology in that way. Like, I can recommend this book, The Laws of Human Nature, from Robert Greene. It's a book. If you need one book in your life just to understand human psychology and how humans behave, then that book is key. And because ultimately, human behavior leaves clues. And if you can catch a red flag early, you can either pay attention to it or you can do something about that. And that's some of the things that help me, like me being very left brain analytical. You're easy labeling stuff. You don't want to overdo that, but understanding how human nature by default works. People do everything for greed, and they want the instant gratification, right? These things are so key. If you understand that humans want that, then how can you structure your offer around that for them to experience some additional perceived value or quick growth? That's just those key points. Number 5, if you have a team or if you work with people, educate your team how to think rather than, today you need to push this button and SOP wise. I think that is so key, understanding like how should people think so they can make decisions for themselves based on what they see in front of them. And that obviously takes more time. But when you have a team who can think individually, you don't need to be there that much. And as long as they can explain why they did certain actions, that's when you have really have amazing people around you. So educate your team on how to think is, in my book, a must-have. And I think I have 2 more. One is follow your gut. I am the living embodiment of not having done that always. I often resonate with my head, make a decision with my head. You're going to come to a point where that doesn't work anymore. So when you have a gut feeling to do something or not do something, try to learn how that gut feeling works and follow that, whether it's left or right. When I notice on a call, I'm talking to a prospect and I notice something is off. And this comes from the human nature side. We have a conversation and I feel like this likely is not going to be a client that's going to stick for long. And I think we're going to lose a lot of time and investment on this client. And even though I have this feeling and I think about that, I still think, let's just do it. We'll just see. And it ends up being a headache client because it proven itself right? So I should have gone with my instinct and said, like, I don't think this is we're the right fit, or for some reason just maybe give it to another agency or whatever. But I just went ahead and it actually bit me in my ass. And this is on a business level, but also on a personal level. I do believe that your whole centric, and this is something completely else, your whole nervous system is kind of like the evolution of humankind, and going against what you feel and how your nervous system functions is actually moving you away from your purpose and your goal. So that is kind of like, I've been reading up in the last years and all that stuff, and I'm very fascinated by it. And the last one is in that same alignment, control through adaptation. So I was typically a person who liked to control everything that was happening around me. And, in the ad account, you basically, if you're doing anything with ads, you're being trained to become this puppet master of the ads and campaign budget and what's so. But in life, you have no control. Sometimes you do everything that you can in Google Ads and the clients, the revenue's going down, whatever happens. we are just a little spoke in the wheel. We cannot control everything. The only control that we have is the adaptation that we can do. So we need to be open to change at all times, under all circumstances, and not overthink our control, but just let it go and just do what we can without overly losing ourselves in the process. And I think that is very much key as an agency owner, because you tend to, you have to put out fires and you have to be present. I see you nodding.
Hard lesson for me to learn as well, because I feel like that very often. I feel like, something's slipping out of my hands here, or something's not. And sometimes you just have to accept that you don't have control over everything, and that you can only influence what you can influence. And that's it feels like admitting defeat, but the reality is that that's not the case, right? But it's just
it's
how
the
it
hardest
is.
thing to do. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the hardest. It was the hardest lesson, but it's also hard to change, because you feel very responsible for everything, and at the same time, you can't be everywhere at the same time, and the only control you have is your adaptation. Because fact is that we only have 10% control, and the 10% is how we react to things, right?
Yeah.
And the rest is all out of our control. And although we might think we have a lot of control, it actually we don't.
Well,
so
if
let's
you
close up with that.
if you want to take control, though, maybe one last call to action: how to get in touch with you again. So LinkedIn, Twitter, Vincent Beima.
Vincent Beima. That's where you can find me on Twitter,
Amazing.
Facebook, and on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Well, I can only recommend that to everyone, because I've been following you for a very long time, and you put out some very thought-inspiring stuff. So hopefully this has been inspiring to many as well. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I can't wait for the onboarding end of this month, and then next month we're going to get started. I'm very excited.
Me too.
Amazing.
I want to thank you for your time and inviting me on here. It was my pleasure, and excited about a collaboration.
Lovely. Thanks so much.
You too.
Vincent, have a good one.
You too. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Google Ads Unleashed. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. If you found value in today's podcast, please share it with others and leave a rating and a review. For more information or to connect with Jeremy, check him out online at www.younganddigital.marketing. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.